Hello, and welcome to our 2020 iFarmiVote video series. Today, I'm joined by Austin Scott, Republican candidate for Georgia's 8th Congressional District. Welcome, Mr. Scott. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we kick off our discussion, I would like to remind our audience that as a nonpartisan organization, Georgia Farm Bureau cannot and will not endorse candidates or tell our members how to vote. Instead, it is our hope that through this video series, and additional resources on our iFarmiVote website, members will be able to make an informed decision as they head to the polls this fall. We have made the same opportunity available to each of the candidates pursuing office in the 14 congressional districts. Representative Scott, thanks again for taking the time to join us. Let's get started. First off, let's get to know you. Obviously, you're in office now, but could you tell me a little bit more about where you're from, your education, how long you've been in office?
Sure. So I grew up in Tifton, Georgia. My family is from Turner County, Georgia, one county up the road. Grandparents were Kurt and Hazel Wells that farmed in Sycamore, and my other grandparents were Austin and Mary Scott. They ran a Scott Oil Company, not to be confused with Exxon, but a small jobbing outfit that delivered fuel to everybody's farms when the tanks were 100 and 250 gallons. And my grandfather ran Kaiser Agricultural Chemicals up there in Turner County. And so certainly been on the farm my whole life. Grew up in Tift County, as I said, graduated high school here, went to the University of Georgia, majored in risk management and insurance, and then came back to Tifton, started an insurance brokerage, and ran that brokerage for about 20 years until I was elected to Congress. Prior to being elected to Congress, I spent 14 years in the State House of Representatives, where we also served on the Ag Committee when we were there.
Very good. So you are no stranger to Georgia agriculture, which is great. As you mentioned, ag is very important in the state of Georgia. You've served on the state ag committee as well as nationally. As the state's largest and strongest general ag organization, Georgia Farm Bureau was founded back in 1937 to be a united voice for our farmers, both in Atlanta and in DC. So that being said, agriculture is the basis of all that we do at Georgia Farm Bureau and is the livelihood for many of our members. So ag issues are very important to our folks. To start us off, what do you think are 3 of the greatest issues that face Georgia agriculture today?
Sure. Well, one real quick one, I'll tell you, we need people to be filling out the census count. We are very much behind the count in Georgia, and rural America is very much behind the metro areas. And so we have the potential to lose one of Georgia's congressional seats. And if we lose one of those seats, it will be one of the rural seats, not one of the metropolitan areas. And so one of the things that's happened that's hurt ag over the last several years is the population trends that have given the metropolitan areas more congressional representation than the rural areas. And so while rural America is 80% of the geography of the United States, the representation in Congress continues to go down. So first, please fill out those census forms. We need every seat that we can have in Washington on the committees and people that support agriculture. So the loss of representation is a problem, not just for Georgia, but for all of the people in rural America, and not just for agriculture, but for all of our rural economies. The primary problem we have right now is that our cost of production is higher than the commodity prices on the board are. And so if you're a farmer and you don't have an interest in a buying point or a gin or some other avenue to get more than just the farm gate value of the commodity, then you're backing up right now. And we're used to having good years and bad years in agriculture, but this year it's on top of the losses from Hurricane Michael and a couple of repeated bad years with commodity prices. And we've lost so much capital over the last couple of years. It's become an issue of who gets to farm or who is able to farm going forward. So we're very concerned about the loss of capital over the last couple of years. We're concerned about the loss of markets to sell our products into. And one of the things that I think we need to talk more about is what is farm revenue as a percentage of what we spend at the grocery store. We haven't been on that message much lately. We used to talk about it a lot, but I recognize that in Georgia, most of the groceries that we buy, certainly if they're not cooked, are sales tax exempt. But but if you check out of the grocery store, you know, the sales tax on what you buy is in most cases going to be larger than the actual farm revenue from the food that you're purchasing. And so there's a tremendous amount of money in there that has moved away from the producer and into whether it's the people who are packaging or processing the food or the groceries. We've got to find a way to get more of that revenue back to the farm so that we have the margin to keep farming next year. The other thing that I see that's happening is the environmental related issues. You know, as you continue to have more and more chemicals taken off the market prior to other chemicals coming onto the market that have proven effective, that makes it harder and harder for us to keep the production levels up on the farm. And as you know, the margins are so thin for our producers that if you don't have that record crop yield, then you simply don't have any margin, and therefore you don't have any profit. And so very concerned about what we see with lawsuits and other things taking products off of the market that we need to keep our ag production as high as we want it to be in America. And so those are several of the things that I'm worried about right now. We're continuing to work on them in Washington. And, you know, rural Americans that get elected to Congress are going to be a part of the solution. We just need more of them and not less.
I appreciate you mentioning the census. We've done a big census push through Farm Bureau, similar to iFarmiVote. We called it You Farm, You Count. For those very reasons you discussed, you know, people in rural Georgia, their vote and their existence matters just as much as those in Metro Atlanta. But obviously, the way the population is sorted out throughout the state, the metro area ends up with a higher representation. So like you mentioned, we don't want to lose that representation and the money and power that goes along with it. So
as a specific example on that, I represent all or part of 24 counties. All are part of 24 counties. The congressman to my west represents all or part of 28 counties. If the census count stays the same way it is, we combined will probably have to pick up another 6 or 7 counties between the two districts, where the Fulton County area may get another member of Congress.
Right.
So it matters.
Things that you don't really realize make such an impact until you start looking into it. Moving on, what's a passion project that you either currently have or could envision creating over the next few years if reelected to Congress that would have an impact on the state and rural Georgia or agriculture in particular?
Sure. So obviously in the next farm bill that we will write over the next 2 to 3 years, that's where a lot of our passion will be put to work. We intend to address several things in there. We intend to address the issue of China's influence and other foreign influence in the seed and chemical supply inside the United States. And as we talk about supply chains for pharmaceuticals, we need to make sure that we're also talking about supply chains in our food and fiber industry. So that's one of the areas that we're pushing very hard on. I'm on the Armed Services Committee as well as the Ag Committee. And so I recognize what China's intent is with their taking over the supply lines, not only of pharmaceuticals, but of ag production as well. So that's one of the areas where we are working very hard. Most of that work is done quite candidly in secure rooms and secure conversations, but know that we are very much aware of Syngenta, ChemChina, the issues with their ownership of supply chain, and we want to bust some of that up quite candidly. The other thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we're talking about, as I said before, farm revenue as a percentage of what the Americans spend on groceries and other things. I think Americans are shocked to find out just how small a percentage of what they pay at the grocery store the American farmer gets. We've got a great opportunity now with what happened in the pandemic. For the first time in many generations, people walked into the grocery store and not only could they not buy what they wanted, they couldn't buy what they needed. And I think that for too long, we had taken for granted that I was simply going to walk into a Publix or a Piggly Wiggly or whatever grocery store it is that you shop at. And the steak that I wanted was going to be on the shelf at a reasonable price. The pork that I wanted was going to be on the shelf at a reasonable price. I could buy spaghetti if I wanted to. And for the first time in generations, Americans walked in the store and the shelves were empty. And so that gives us the opportunity to talk about the things that those of us from the ag economy have recognized for a long time, is that we as America have lost control of our supply chains in the food and fiber area. And if you think being dependent on foreign countries for oil is bad enough, imagine being dependent on foreign countries for your food supply. That's an area we cannot afford to go as a country.
Right. So all very good points. Something that I think the pandemic has definitely, I wouldn't call it a positive, but I think it has caused folks to appreciate the availability that they have had for so long of locally grown product in their grocery store. If elected again, you mentioned that you are a largely rural district. What will you do? And you've mentioned some of these things as well, but to continue to improve rural access to amenities like healthcare, government services, other business opportunities, or education for our rural Georgians?
Sure. So look, I mean, the foundation of our economy in rural America is agriculture. We have to make sure that our foundation is strong, because if the foundation is not strong, then the other things that are built upon it aren't going to be strong either. With regard to education, I think the expansion of 5G and faster internet service, again, the pandemic has shown us just how important that is. And so continuing to push forward with the development of those things. We've done things in the past in the farm bills with what's called the middle mile and trying to get better infrastructure put in so that we can have the faster broadband. I'm not satisfied that we have gotten our money's worth with what the federal government has put in to try to get the expansion of rural broadband. So we're going to continue to press the companies that have taken the money as to why we're not seeing greater expansions of broadband in those areas. But I do think with regard to education, you've got to acknowledge, again, this is something we're learning in this pandemic, that we have to have access for all of our children to learn, especially if classes are going to be taught over Zoom and other areas. Same thing for healthcare. We're not going to have the most advanced cardiology treatment in our small rural hospitals, but we can have technology that allows our nurses and our physicians in those small rural hospitals to connect to some of the most advanced treatment centers when we have somebody admitted to the emergency room, so that we can get the technical details, the technical knowledge that the nurse and maybe the general practitioner need to deliver the health care to the patient that's sitting there in rural America. So I think a lot of it comes through technology. The other thing that's got to happen with regard to rural healthcare, we've seen just how fragile our hospital systems are through the pandemic, and the loss of revenue from elective procedures has put a tremendous burden on our small hometown hospitals. It's put a big burden on the big hospitals as well, quite candidly. But the big hospitals had the reserves and the other things to help carry them through. So we're going to have to work on a funding formula that helps the rural hospitals in America have the revenue that they need to provide the services that they need, and recognizing that part of that is going to come through Medicare, part of that is going to come through Medicaid, and part of that is going to come through addressing what is quite candidly a discrimination in the insurance markets, where those of us in the rural parts of the country have in some cases no access to private health insurance, and in many cases access to only one insurance carrier whose costs are prohibitive. And so trying to get competition back into the insurance market, the health insurance market, will be good for the citizens, and it'll be good for the healthcare providers, because obviously if somebody comes in with insurance, then fees are paid for the services that are rendered.
Very good, thank you. Before I let you go, we're going to wrap up with a couple fun Georgia agriculture questions. First, I would like for you to tell me your favorite Georgia grown commodity.
No, it's got to be peanuts. I mean, peanuts. It's got to be peanuts. Peanuts paid my mom's way through college. That's paid my way through college. So it's got to be peanuts.
That's a good answer. Good reason too.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of peanuts, we're fortunate to have an abundance of Georgia-grown commodities to choose from, but a big taboo question in the Georgia agriculture world is it a pecan or a pecan?
It's a pecan unless it's pecan pie.
Perfect. I've heard answers all over the spectrum. I kind of expected you to say pecan, but I say pecan, so I support your answer. I think it kind of depends on where you grow up too, but that being said, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us again today. Our iFarmiVote initiative goes beyond our rural districts and our farmers and touches every citizen who is impacted by agriculture, which, as you know, is our #1 industry in the state. So thank you for all the work you've done for agriculture, both statewide and nationally. And thank you for spending some time to discuss your campaign with us today and your support of ag. And we wish you the best of luck with the remainder.
Thank you and God bless.
Thank you.